Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another video. As you can tell from up there, it is another home video review, and it's another Shout Factory one, though. This one is a DVD one, because that's the format I got this one on, back when Shout Factory would actually give you the option of which format you wanted. Now they just force the Blu-ray on you, which I thought was a stupid decision, but that's a rant for another day. But this, of course, is their DVD release of the John Carpenter classic, which he ended out the 80s with, starring Roddy Piper, They Live. I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum. Now, as far as I know, before this release, there was no special edition of this film, which is sad. Now, the features on here are pretty good. Now, compared to The Thing, it is a little scampy, but earlier effort versus a more recent one, not going to really be a fair comparison, even though it's from the same director. And the features are all pretty good. The main one is the director commentary that also features Roddy Piper, which sadly, this is the only recent feature on this DVD that actually has Piper in it. Which, of course, is sad that if they ever did a reissue, now that Piper's no longer with us, we can't correct that. But it's the only new thing that he's on, which is fine. I mean, it's a good commentary between him and Carpenter. It's basically them shooting the shit. If you ever listened to Piper's podcast when he was alive, there was an episode where he had John Carpenter on. If you listen to that and then listen to this, you notice some similarities. I mean, they even go over some similar ground, but since the podcast was more a general thing instead of just on the film, the commentary focuses more on the film, obviously. But it's nice to hear them shoot the shit. It's obvious they still consider each other great friends, and their little insights on the film is interesting. And of course, I do like that Piper tells that one story about the Brunswick incident, which he thought, or at least was making it seem like in the commentary, he thought was real when it was just a mockumentary he came across. The funny thing is that if Carpenter knew that the thing he was talking about was a mockumentary, he didn't correct him. He was just like, oh, really? Interesting. It's hard to tell whether he's actually going along with it or if he had never heard of it and then decided to go research it. It's very interesting. Other little tidbits about every time they see Hamada in the film, like, hey, there's Hamada, among other stuff, talking about why they did certain shots the way they did. You know, there's a map painting, stuff like that. Then, of course, near the end of the commentary, Piper brings up the story about Vince telling him, hey, just give me a couple weeks, I'll get you a movie for the same amount of money. And he's like, not with John Carpenter, you're not. The movie he's going to make with me is going to be better than the movie that you would make with me. And there are other little stories, but they're all interesting. Then we also have a director interview with John Carpenter, which is also a very interesting one. Some of the stuff that he mentions is stuff that comes up on the commentary, but it's a lot more general. The main thing, of course, being is that the film is a attack at Reaganomics in the direction the country was going because of it, and it seemed to favor more the wealthy, and it hurt the poor, which, sad to say, that economic thing is still being felt today, and the middle class is not as strong as it once was. It's recovered a little bit since the recession, but we still have a long way to go. And I know he mentions this in the commentary. I don't remember if he mentions this in the interview, but I believe he does, is that how he approached his take on it. He did not want the message to overshadow the film itself, as in, people would see the message and go, oh, and then the rest of the film is lost in them, either because of its approach or all that. I think probably the best example of a film where the message of the film overshadows the whole film itself would be Elysium, where you're like, oh, it's about healthcare. Ooh, and then just the way the film was executed overshadows it all. I'm gonna have to rewatch that film one day down the road and do a review of it. But with this one, you could tell it's like, oh, it's about economics, and specifically the whole trickle-down thing of Reaganomics. But even if you don't notice that, you can still see a little bit what it's going at. It doesn't force it into your face. Makes it obvious it's about the poor, the whole middle class versus the upper class thing, but doesn't to you. And that's what Carpenter mentioned. He mentioned more behind the scenes stuff. It's interesting. I'm not going to go into major detail about everything, but it's an interesting watch. Then there was an interview with Meg Foster, which is also a very interesting thing. One thing she points out, which watching the commentary, like, I could see a little bit of that, and that is that she felt one of the reasons Carpenter hired her, besides her acting chops, was her eyes. It's just that the way her eyes come off on screen, there's a special quality about them, and watching the way Carpenter set up all the shots with her, I'm like, okay, I could see where she's coming from with that, because her eyes seem to be a focal point of every shot that she's in. Just the way her, if you watch the film, you notice how her eyes are. Carpenter really accentuated them in his shots, as a good director should. Then there's an interview with a lot of the other people. Hamada's in it, and he tells a lot of the stories about how he set up the legendary fight scene, which, as a side note, the commentary during that scene is very interesting. He mentions that it was based on a John Wayne fight scene. I forget the name of the movie that he mentions, but it's one where him and another guy fight throughout the whole city, or town, or whatever they're in. But of course with this one they're not going throughout the whole thing, they just go back and forth throughout the alley. And one thing that Carpenter mentions in another interview, but he kind of mentions it without saying it in this language with the fight scene, is that he wanted to be different than other fight scenes and other action movies of the time where the hero was invincible, going through the whole Superman phase, is that he wanted to show that the hero was vulnerable. And you really get that with the fight scene, and Hamada did a great job choreographing the fight scene. And of course he mentions how he felt when he was basically drafted into playing all the male ghouls. And of course he's also the one in that indie scene. What's the matter, baby? That's the only thing, my only look at play with the commentaries. They don't do a joke at that point. Then again, they're talking about other stuff, so they don't get the chance. The guy that helped Carpenter with the score, I'm gonna get his name real quick. That's on here somewhere. Alan Howarth. Nice little conversation he talks about where him and Carpenter did the score. They're not in the same room together. It's just, cross-cutting between them talking about the score, where Carpenter just did basic ideas and Alan helped him with it. That's it in a nutshell, but they go into more detail on it. There's an interview with the director of photography, and there's even an interview with Keith David, which, looking at that, that's the reason why I'm a little disappointed that Piper doesn't have an interview all to himself, but I guess he gets most of what he has to say about the film out in the commentary, whereas David's not in the commentary, so they give him a separate thing. Some of it looks like they reused for The Thing, a couple bits of it, or he said similar things and it just sounded like it was the same thing. I'd probably have to pop the DVD, the Blu-ray in and watch it back to back, but it came off as that. And he mentions, I didn't get to act in another film for 4 years, and then it goes from there talking about the whole thing with They Live and how he got called in for that. And apparently, when Carpenter sent him the script, he's like, he wanted to make sure his character wasn't stereotypical. I was like, it was at first he didn't know what he meant. That he read through the script, he's like, oh, I see what he meant. And he does a little talk about the working poor, and that's how he approached his character in this film, which his character is a working poor. It's a very interesting little discussion he goes on through. One story that he mentioned about The Thing was that when he went to go see it, he went to a bar next door, and he was wearing a shirt Universal sent to him, and the bartender was like, you really must like that movie. He was like, I was in it, and the bartender did not believe him. He was like, yeah, right. Which makes me think, with how David looks, he must have really grown his hair back or saying something about his face for the bartender to go, yeah, right. Because if you look at how Keith David looks in this film, just physically, his face and all that, and how he looks in The Thing, it looks about the same. So did Carpenter ask him to go back to how he looked in The Thing, at least face and hair wise? Because in the interview, he has hair, so he could grow hair out. It's not like he went bald, but it's one of those things like, did he really look that different, or had the guy not seen the film and he would just call him bullshit for the sake of calling bullshit? And this is one other thing I really do like about this, is that we have a featurette from back in the day on this DVD. And that's the only other thing that Piper's on. Of course, it's from him on the set talking. It's very interesting to see this, and also some behind-the-scenes footage. It was the last feature I watched. Definitely worth watching. The last one of any interest is a little reel that has more footage from the commercials that we see throughout the film that were shot specifically for the film. You see them in their entirety. Nice little novelty there. And then, of course, all the things you would expect. There's all the trailers and theatric and the TV spots. And there's even an option to read the original screenplay, which I can't do on my PlayStation. I'd have to do it on here. I haven't done it yet, but it's going to be an interesting thing to read through. By original screenplay, I wonder if it means like the first draft or the draft before they started shooting, because they mentioned they changed a couple things on set, just a couple minor things. If that's the case, if it's the one they did before shooting, it makes me wonder how the fight scene comes off on the page as opposed to on screen. Like, did they change some things as they were choreographing it? I know they were expecting the fight to be shorter, or at least IMDb says that Carpenter decided to keep the whole fight in, but, you know, page to screen, we'll see one of these days. If you are a fan of They Live and you do not have this DVD in your collection, or the Blu-ray version, depending on which version you want, I highly recommend you get it. Or else, you're going to have some bubblegum coming out of your ass.